Who are some of the smartest criminals out there? Let's find out why, starting with number 6, outrageously restricted. Jimmy Sabatino, an alleged associate of the Gambino crime family, built a career out of outrageous scams and has now told the police to lock him in a supermax prison because he cannot help but defraud people. He said this during his sentencing for a $10 million fraud charge that he's been convicted of. Sabatino's scamming history started when he was still a teenager. When he was just 17, Sabatino posed as a Coca-Cola executive just to get free hotel rooms. After that, he was given 262 free tickets to the Super Bowl by pretending to be a Blockbuster video executive, and he sold them for $235,800. He was eventually caught and sentenced to 2 years in prison, and when he got out, our man Sabatino continued on his scamming grind. He threw himself a 21st birthday party at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. However, he was arrested when he refused to pay the $55,000 bill. While out on bail, Sabatino skipped town and flew to London, where he got a room at the Four Seasons Hotel by claiming to be a movie studio executive. UK police caught him, and he got himself locked up. So, Sabatino decided to do what most people would do in his situation. He called the FBI from jail and threatened to end President Bill Clinton's life. Apparently, the FBI got all worked up about it because we're sure many serious, credible threats are called in directly to the FBI from jails in other countries. So Sabatino was sent back to the US and sentenced to a further 4 years in prison, which was probably what he wanted to have happen. Then, 2 years into his prison sentence, the police found out that he'd been running a scam to defraud a phone company of over $3 million. The courts added 11 years to his remaining 2 years sentence for it. You'd think this would be enough to finally put Sabatino off crime forever, but if you thought that, you would be wrong. While in prison, Sabatino told the New York Times that he'd been linked to the passing of Tupac Shakur and also fed them fake documents to that effect. Sabatino eventually got out, but instead of getting a job, he decided to run his scams again. Less than a year after his release, Sabatino was arrested for posing as a music label executive to scam Miami hotels out of $600,000 in presidential suites, bottles of champagne, and expensive cuisine. So he was spun around 180 degrees and marched right back into prison. It was when Sabatino was back in prison that he hatched his most extraordinary scam yet. In this con, he convinced jail wardens to smuggle in phones for him, and he used these phones to dupe luxury retailers to send expensive items to his co-conspirators outside the prison. He ran this scam for a while, and by the time he was caught, he duped several businesses of over $10 million in total. At this point, Sabatino had been sentenced to over 20 years throughout his criminal career, and the courts were fed up, so his judge decided to hand down a 20-year sentence in the hope that it would stop him from duping anyone else. But during his sentencing, Sabatino argued that the only way to stop him from scamming was to make sure he didn't have outside contact with anyone in a supermax prison. This meant he couldn't speak with any relatives, couldn't have any phone privileges, and would be in solitary confinement. So that's exactly what the court did. Sabatino was sent to the supermax in Colorado, where he'll be living with some of the most infamous criminals. We're interested to see if he regrets this decision in a few years. Number 5. Lifting curses. Xuekun Sue scammed 2 women of over $150,000 by telling them that they were cursed and needed to be blessed by her. But instead of blessing the women, Sue robbed them instead. Sue's scheme started when she immigrated to the United States from China. She left behind a husband and 3 children in her country and wanted to work to send money back home. When she arrived in the U.S., she started working for a woman who didn't pay her or give her any benefits. But the woman told her that in exchange for her labor, she would gain status in the country and a better income. But Sue wasn't just working a regular job. She was given a job as a spiritualist or a psychic of some kind. 2 women, also originally from China, came to see Sue, and she told them that they'd been cursed by a malevolent power. She told them that to remove the curse, they had to bring their jewelry, as she needed to bless them, obviously. So the women brought jewelry totaling $150,000, and Sue blessed them. She then put the jewels in a bag and told the women that they couldn't open it for weeks as a part of the ritual. When the women eventually opened opened the bag, they found that their jewels had been stolen, so they reported Sue to the police. By the time the police caught up with Sue, her employer had fled, and she was the only one left to face the music. She was eventually convicted and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. During the sentencing, Sue apologized and said she now realizes the harm she's done. The scam was pretty clever, but Sue probably should have just staged a robbery or something when she had the jewels. How you leave is almost as important as how you go in. Number 4. Undocumented. An elderly woman who remains anonymous was robbed of $10,000 after falling for the ingenious tricks of 2 fraudsters. The woman in question was approached by 2 women who asked if she could speak Spanish. She said she could, probably by saying "sí," and then asked if she could drive them to a church that helped immigrants. The victim then got into the vehicle with both immigrants and began driving to the nearby church. While inside the car, one of the fraudsters began crying. The woman asked what was wrong, and she replied that she'd won the lottery, but that couldn't get the money because she was an illegal immigrant. Right there in the car, a third person, who is also a part of the criminal gang, called the crying woman, saying that she could get the prize if she came to the lottery office with $20,000. The person on the phone pretended to be from the lottery company, so it must have all felt pretty convincing. But it was still phony as fake baloney. One of the fraudsters then left the car and returned later with $10,000. That's when they activated the move that the entire charade had been for. They asked the victim if she could help them with another $10,000 to complete the sum. The victim probably thought that since they already had their own $10,000, the lottery win was a sure thing. So she drove home to get $10,000 in cash for the women. She then put the money in the glove compartment and continued driving. Later on in the journey, one of the women complained about a stomach pain. So the woman got out of the vehicle to buy her some medicine. By the time she was back, both women and the $10,000 in her glove compartment were gone. Sadly, fraudsters who operate this sort of scheme often target elderly people who they believe will be easier to psychologically and emotionally manipulate. It's a little surprising that this lady just happened to have $10,000 in cash just lying around her house, and these fraudsters just happened to choose her. That's some seriously bad luck. Number 3. A new address. Dushan Henderson Spruce redirected mail from the UPS HQ to his home after submitting a change of address form to the U.S. Postal Service. It's hard to understand how and why Dushan believed he could get away with this, since someone is bound to notice pretty quickly. But he almost did. First, Dushan submitted a written U.S. Postal Service change of address form. On the form, he only used his initials and added UPS behind it. For some reason, the change of address was approved, and UPS had their mail delivered to Dushan's 1-bedroom apartment for 3 months. He received so much mail that his postman had to start putting his mail in a delivery tub. In that huge pile of mail, Dushan got 10 checks worth around $58,000. He also got letters that were meant for employees of UPS and the CEO of the company itself, as well as 5 corporate credit cards. Dushan submitted a few more wrong forms to the U.S. Postal Service and eventually diverted the mail to a 7-story gated courtyard building. His scam was only discovered when a security officer noticed the address change and began investigating the incident. This led to a police raid on Dushan's apartment, where the police discovered over 3,000 pieces of mail. Dushan was arrested and entered into a plea agreement. The plea agreement mandates Dushan returns the $58,000 that was rerouted into his account. The U.S. Postal Service gets millions of address change requests every year. The form can be submitted online or in person. While there is a warning on the form that states that people who submit false or inaccurate information can be fined or imprisoned, it doesn't look like the U.S. Post Office itself verifies the information on the file. So that's probably why Dushan was able to get away with his scam for more than 3 months. It makes you wonder if Dushan could have gotten away with this crime if he had just diverted the mail to a P.O. box and accessed it using a fake ID. Instead, he diverted it to his house, and obviously, he was eventually caught. Number 2. Feeding the kids. Scammers in Cambodia have created an ingenious but sad way of scamming unsuspecting tourists. A single mother with a baby on her hips approaches a random tourist. The woman looks really shabby, her clothes are worn out, and the baby looks tired and drowsy. The woman asks the tourist for a simple favor. She doesn't want money, she just wants the tourist to buy some baby formula for her so that she can feed her child. Most tourists fall for the lie. They don't want an innocent child to suffer, so the woman takes them to a shop near the area where the tourist is asked to purchase a $40 can of overpriced formula. Sometimes the tourist takes a picture with the baby, glad that they've done something good in the world. What the tourist doesn't know is that immediately after they leave, the woman goes back into the store to sell the formula back to the store owner, and then they split the profit. A single scammer can repeat this scam 20 times a night. It's a really sad situation, especially considering the plight of the babies used in the scam. There's speculation that some of the babies are made to look hungry. However, various NGOs that have investigated these sort of scams say that they've found no concrete evidence that any kids are being harmed. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned for our past release to find out the ingenious way this guy was able to get away. Number 1. Closed doors. Alexander Henry Costa Mota thought that he had found an infinite money glitch that allowed him to make endless cash. He would walk into a Home Depot dressed as a contractor, grab a few expensive doors, load them on a lumber cart, and then return the doors to the store right then, without a receipt, in exchange for store credit. Alexander then spent those store credits in another store in the area. In Home Depots that didn't allow receiptless returns, he simply took the doors away from the store and returned them to another store that allowed receiptless returns. Alexander pulled off his scam roughly 370 times over 9 months in various states, earning enough store credit to purchase over $290,000 worth of Home Depot stuff. But how did Alexander make all these returns without triggering a verification system? How did he get away with it for so long? Well, Home Depot's policy allows people to return items without receipts, but uses other means of identification, like IDs, to verify the return. However, Alexander got through these hoops by using fake IDs with made-up names. Eventually, Alexander's luck ran out and he was caught by Home Depot's organized retail crime investigators. They provided law enforcement with video evidence of his theft and he was eventually arrested. The fact that Alexander got away with it for that long is pretty impressive, but at what point do you quit such a successful scam like that? It's hard to know how far ahead you are until you're caught and someone tells you. 4 days before his passing, Thomas Randall's family learned his big secret. He was wanted by the U.S. Marshals for robbing a bank in 1969. Just like how any family would be, they were in shock. It all started with a Steve McQueen movie. Thomas was born in Cleveland, Ohio. He grew up in the 50s and late 60s, idolizing cool, big-screen actors like James Dean and Marlon Brando. Of course, Dean and Brando often portrayed morally gray characters doing somewhat immoral things. But none of these characters had the same effect as Steve McQueen's character in the Thomas Crown Effect. The film is about a billionaire named Thomas Crown who steals $20 million from a bank in Boston. It came out when our Thomas was 19 years old. He watched one of his idols live out the romantic life of a bank robber. Thomas Crown lived in Boston, a more well-known city than Cleveland, Ohio, where Randall lived. But Steve McQueen's Thomas wasn't cool because of where he lived or what he did. He was cool for how he did it, which was why Thomas idolized the character in real life. Thomas Crown didn't steal because he needed the money. He stole for fun. He treated it like a game. Randall saw him play bank robber on the big screen and wanted to play too. He wanted to be like Steve McQueen. He wanted to know what it felt like to pull off a heist. However, Thomas needed to take baby steps and work his way up to professional bank robber. If he wanted to be like McQueen's character, he'd have to start acting, dressing, and drinking like him too. According to the U.S. Marshals report from 1969, Thomas drove an MG sports car, sipped expensive gin, and showed off his prowess for golf and billiards. When he turned 20, Thomas got a job as a low-level bank worker. Everyone expects a bank robber to be a gun-toting masked criminal waving a burlap bag at whimpering employees. Thomas knew he could not recreate this Steve McQueen heist. Instead, Thomas's plan was to rob the bank from the inside. His job made the heist like stealing candy from a baby, or, in this case, stealing money right out of the vault. When the tellers needed more money and they're registered, Thomas's job was to go into the vault and get it. So if someone saw him pillaging through the bank vault, they wouldn't ask any questions. As far as they knew, Thomas was just doing his job. Thomas bragged to his friends about how easy it would be to rob a bank. Of course, they thought his claims were outlandish and borderline delusional. Most heists ended badly for the heistee after all. They probably assumed Thomas was all talk, but he wasn't. On a lovely morning in 1969, Thomas Randall, known then as Theodore Conrad, walked into the Society National Bank of Cleveland and only a few minutes later walked out with $215,000 in a brown paper bag. He also had a carton of cigarettes and a bottle of whiskey in true McQueen fashion. According to bank records, Thomas divided the money carefully. He took 1,500 $100 bills, 1,200 $50 bills, and 250 20s. Today, Thomas's payload would be worth around $1.7 million. The bank didn't even notice they were missing any funds until Monday when Thomas didn't show up for work in the morning. They soon discovered he was missing, along with $215,000. They alerted the U.S. Marshals, who launched a manhunt for young Theo. His face was plastered in newspapers all around Ohio. The FBI even put him on the most wanted list, where he would appear quite frequently as dozens of law agencies across the country searched for him. Some people thought Theo, now Thomas, fled to 3 likely locations: California, Paris, and Hawaii. However, none of these locations were proven by law enforcement. They were just false alarm sightings of Thomas. One Ohio couple thought they saw him in Hawaii 3 months after the heist. They told police that they were sitting at a tiki bar in the Princess Kailani Hotel on Waikiki Beach when they had a strange encounter with a fellow guest. The couple was relaxing and trying to enjoy their vacation, so they began chatting with a man at the bar. A few minutes into their conversation, the couple mentioned Cleveland, Ohio. Suddenly, the man's attitude changed. He excused himself to use the bathroom and never came back. Not long after meeting the strange man, the Cleveland couple saw a picture of Thomas in the papers. They called the police, telling authorities they had seen the wanted bank robber at their hotel only a couple days ago, although he probably wasn't still in the bathroom. The local authorities in Waikiki searched everywhere for the man at the bar. Eventually, they got a lead at an apartment complex near the hotel, but the man had left already. The landlord said the man paid with cash, which of course, the police couldn't trace. They still aren't 100% sure if that was Thomas or just someone who resembled him. So where did Thomas go? What kind of life did he lead as a wanted man? The incident in Hawaii was the only lead U.S. Marshals would find on Thomas's location for decades. They still believe he was there, but escaped and went back to the United States mainland. After the Hawaii sighting, the Marshals received more tips from all around the U.S. One came in from Washington, D.C., another came from Inglewood, California. The Marshals even got a call from Oregon saying they'd seen Thomas. He apparently showed up in the picturesque outlaw country of West Texas. If the Marshals got a call, they dropped everything and went to that location. However, they never once stopped to check the city Thomas was actually living in, the city where he spent 30 years hiding from authorities: Boston. It made sense, though. The Thomas Crown affair was filmed in Boston, and Randall even lived a few blocks away from the filming location. He could probably sense McQueen's presence. Thomas did hop around a bit, but eventually he settled down in the Boston area. He started a family, built a career, and became a well-liked member of his suburban community. The man in the proverbial wanted posters was Theodore Conrad, the audacious bank robber. He changed his name to Thomas Randall, who, by contrast, was an innocent suburbanite who lived a remarkable life. Thomas quickly realized that he couldn't live off his heist money forever. As he started running out of cash, he searched for work in the area. He didn't find anything substantial. He must have known where people were looking for him, because Thomas went to one of the few regions U.S. Marshals didn't: Florida. He found work in the prestigious Pembroke Country Club. He started off as a golf instructor and worked his way up to teaching pro. Yes, Thomas was technically a pro golfer. He held the secondary, but still esteemed, title of assistant golf pro. Thomas played in the Winter Tour for 1 year. He retired early to a comfortable management position at Pembroke, where he earned a steady salary for several years. According to his wife and children, Thomas genuinely loved golf. Becoming a pro golfer probably wasn't the best career choice for one of the most wanted men in America, but it was worth the risk. After all, what would Thomas Crown do? Randall eventually quit his job at Pembroke and pursued his other McQueen-inspired passion: cars. Thomas retired from golf in the 70s and stayed in Boston full-time, where he started a luxury car dealership. He named the business Woburn Foreign Motors. Through Woburn, Thomas sold all kinds of vehicles, but he especially loved working on and selling Range Rovers and Volvos. He spent nearly 40 years in the car business until his forced retirement in 2021. Cancer forced him to hang it up, a disease that plagued the last few years of Thomas's life. Thomas spent those years caring for his wife, Kathy, and his daughter, Ashley. Of course, they were still blissfully unaware of their father and husband's criminal past. They only knew Thomas Randall, not the wanted bank robber, Theodore Conrad. Thomas was a car salesman who loved to cook for his family. He'd spend hours in the kitchen experimenting with new recipes. When the family of 3 sat down for dinner, he'd always ask them if he should make the dish again. Unfortunately, and somewhat ironically, Thomas was not good with money. In 2014, he filed for bankruptcy. And by the time he passed away in 2021, Thomas was flat broke. His family could never have imagined their loving family man was once rich in stolen bank money. That was until he told them the truth. Thomas revealed his 1969 bank heist 4 days before he passed away. His family chose to admit the crime from his obituary. Of course, that didn't stop the news from getting out. The U.S. Marshals released their findings in a public report, which finally closed a case that had gone unsolved for over 50 years and was led by 2 generations of marshals. U.S. Marshal John K. Elliott nearly spent his entire life looking for Thomas. In 1969, Elliott was a marshal in Cleveland and was the first person the bank called when they discovered the robbery. Elliott chased every lead he could get, but as we now know, those leads were just the breadcrumbs of a wild goose chase. Elliott started on the case in 1969 and hunted Thomas until 1990. However, Elliott's son, Peter J. Elliott, says his father never stopped searching for Thomas. After his retirement, Peter says he remembers his father keeping up with any leads the U.S. Marshals had on Thomas. He even investigated some leads himself. Peter recalls his father telling him how Thomas, or Theodore as he knew him, was the one fugitive who got away. Elliott passed away in 2020, 1 year before Thomas confessed his crimes. So unfortunately, Elliott never got closure on the case that spanned his entire career and life. Before Elliott died, however, the U.S. Marshals, currently on Thomas's case, shared some news with the retiree. They were getting close to finding Thomas. They told Elliott they'd found a connection between 2 documents in Thomas's name. Peter was the marshal leading the investigation and remembers telling his father the news personally. The news also came with a word of thanks. Elliott had compiled most of the research used in the Conrad investigation, including a document signed by Thomas Randall. The signature on the pre-69 document was compared to the signature on a more recent version. Marshals compared the T in Thomas and Theodore and determined the same hand must have written both signatures. It took Peter and his team about a year to make the connection. By that point, Thomas was already on his deathbed and he'd confessed to the crime. Arresting Thomas would have been pointless. Peter knows his dad will rest easier knowing they found him regardless of whether or not Thomas was prosecuted. Thomas Randall lived the life he always dreamed of before passing away on May 18, 2021. Who could ask for anything more? Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you think is the easiest scam to fall for.